Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Rueter. I'm a professor at Concordia University, Irvine, as well as district staff at the Pacific Southwest District, author of Teaching the Faith at Home through Concordia Publishing, and today I'm presenting on a heart of teaching the faith in the home, school, and church. I'm going to put this up front, right out in front of you here. If you catch anything, this is the statement I want you walking out of here with. Okay, parents are the single greatest influence on the future faith lives of children and youth. Those that struggle with this are parents. They sit with their kids and they wonder, can I actually teach the faith to them? Will it be effective? How do I respond to questions? How do I, as a parent, possibly speak into this little life that I love so dearly? My boys are 6 and 10, so you can imagine how little sleep there is in this house. They are high energy. I have a 10-year-old who is exceptionally verbal. I have no idea where he gets that. And a 6-year-old who would sooner punch you than have a conversation. So you can imagine the entertaining dynamic there. So, conversations related to faith get real entertaining within our family. And it's the kind of a thing where when he was much younger, James, our 10-year-old, for some reason we managed to have a conversation about the Trinity while I was trying to help give him a bath. Don't ask why that's the conversation in that moment, but he starts asking questions. And he asks, Dad, we were talking about the Holy Spirit in Sunday school. Okay. Well, James, tell me, what did you learn about the Holy Spirit? Well, the Holy Spirit, that's God. Yeah, good. But James, help me out with this, because I'm thinking, the educator in me is going, okay, there's some processing, there's some stuff we can do here. So, who's the Father, James? Oh, yeah, that's God. Okay. Well, help me out with this. Who's Jesus? That's the Son, right? Yeah, that's God. I said, James, okay, so how many gods do we have? Well, duh, Dad, one. That's the point. Drop mine, I'm out. I have achieved everything I need to. I have taught the Trinity. There it is. He was 5 years old. Bath time. We have these conversations. I will tell these stories to parents. These are not complicated things. But in our own minds, we complicate them. And trying to instill this and encourage parents. We're on the same team here. We know this, right? Saying the idea that whether it's in our classrooms or in youth group, that the parents are going to be the most effective in teaching the faith. We know this. The struggle is, how do we help parents to figure this out? I love confirmation. I love it. Now, not because my own experience being confirmed was educationally effective. I had a pastor who, God love him, he meant well, but he had no earthly business in a classroom filled with 7th and 8th graders. He just didn't. But dutifully, once a week, my dad, who was my principal for 10 years, and my 7th and 8th grade teacher, and let me tell you, that is the single worst 2 years to have your dad as principal. He has the distinction of being the only teacher to have suspended me. And the fact that he only did it once was probably an act of mercy on his part. I seriously earned it, repeatedly. But God love him, our pastor comes in and he is trying to teach. And we are trying to do anything we possibly can to get him off topic or trick him into any number of little items. So, for example, Pastor, what was the memory work for today we were supposed to learn? Could you write it on the board for us? I kid you not, this worked. Turns, writes it on the chalkboard. Goes back to teaching the lesson. We're doing memory work at the end of the lesson. He no longer has an idea that the memory work is written behind him. Yeah, educationally effective, no. But I try to take those little interesting nuggets into my own ministry as a DCE and getting the opportunity to teach confirmation. Now, just prior to, I had a kind of a weird wilderness year for about, a year, between internship in Texas and my first call in Huntington Beach, California. And during that time, my old Lutheran elementary school, they asked me to come back and they had me do some part-time teaching for them. And I'm having a conversation with that pastor again as he is bracing, and I mean literally bracing to go back in to teach confirmation again. And it reminded me, I got all of, just the flashbacks were coming to, yes, I remember you teaching me confirmation. And I was this close to saying, do us all a favor, just hand me the catechism now. You don't want to be there. Reasonably certain the kids don't want you there. But I had my mother's, who was also, my mother was a first grade teacher for years. I had her voice in the back of my head saying, don't start something you can't finish. Okay, I'll behave. She told me that when at 18, my church decided to let me be Sunday school superintendent for a couple of months over the summer, and I started going, well, we're going to change the recording system, and we're going to start doing this. Okay, stop. You're leaving in 2 months. You're going to college. Go. I still don't know how to do that. So, that I bring into my ministry as a DCE, and thankfully in the congregations that I've served, I have been able to be very hands-on in the teaching of confirmation. And so, what I started to notice, and this felt weird to me, but when I started having kids showing up and saying, can I invite my friends to confirmation? They want to come? Sure. And when it starts consistently happening, you start wanting to say, what's happening that's different? I was in confirmation because, I had no choice.
We've got Lutheran.
Right, it's, you're supposed to. I did have an interest in the learning, but these are kids that aren't a part of the church, and they're asking if they can come because their friends are getting enough out of it that they're excited and they want to see, well, what is this? We welcomed multiple families into the congregation through our confirmation ministry. Both congregations I serve, the same phenomenon happens. So when I start trying to figure out, okay, I'm a sick puppy, I like to go to grad school a little too much, so I thought, I'll go get a doctorate, why not? Sure, that's, my free time, let's do that. No, I really am messed up in that way. So I started thinking, well, what would I want to study? And what I wanted to figure out was what's happening with regard to my own confirmation program and what I remember from confirmation as a kid, and what's the difference? And the thing that I was trying to look at in the midst of this was, is there some particular method of instruction that is going to better help connect young people to the life of the church? That's the research question that I was starting with. And I can tell you the answer was no, there isn't. It's not about the lesson plans that you put together. It's not about what curriculum you have. As I did study on confirmation and I've done various things like this, a lot of times the question comes up, it's like, well, what kind of curriculum do you recommend? I try not to recommend curriculum. It's not about the curriculum. It's about the relationships that are developed in and alongside the teaching that you're doing. The biggest thing that started coming out as I'm doing this study was the connection of the family prior and during their time in confirmation. That was the biggest predictor. In the midst of this, I'm doing other parallel research and trying to look at who else is studying similar things. And this is a 4-decade longitudinal study, Vern Benson at USC. And he looked at, over these years, and he's studying how faith is transmitted from one generation to the next. And the characteristics of parents that he identified, he and his research team identifies, one, that there's a warm and affirming relationships. That within the home, yes, there's discipline, yes, there's a need to understand who's in charge. My 6-year-old thinks he is. That gets to be rather entertaining on occasion. But in the midst of the discipline that takes place and the structure of the home, is there a warm relationship? Are children affirmed in and with those conversations? I think this especially becomes important as they become preteens and teenagers. My 10-year-old is tottering into the preteen attitude. We will be having, our district has a preteen event for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and we'll be using the theme of whatever this year. Does that bring whatever? We're going to embrace the whatever on this, because he is tottering into this attitude time where the conversations are going to get a little more interesting. I don't know how many times I've had conversations with families who will start saying, you know, I can't get my 16-year-old to talk to me. Were you talking what were your conversations like when your 16-year-old was 10? Well, and it's not to say that you can't work through that with a 16-year-old, but every step further back. So those of you who are doing early childhood, if you can start laying some of this foundation and encourage your families, have very basic faith talk conversations. Sit down with parents, and I'm going to pick on dads. Sit down with dads. Dad, by and large, does not like the idea of I might be asked a question I don't know the answer to. So Dad wants to avoid being in that situation, so Dad will avoid that situation because he doesn't want to be embarrassed. But if you can get Dad comfortable with this, hey, do it when they're 4 years old. Do it when they're 3 years old. Grow with their questions. You establish that ground in which that conversation takes place, so you have a warm and affirming relationship in which conversations about faith are natural and normal. So you're not waiting for the 13-year-old in confirmation to go, yeah, but my science teacher is telling me this, and you're telling me this, and whoop, it's not working. If you're starting the conversation then, you missed a foundation plan that is rich and very beneficial. Second point that Bankston talks about is parental religious involvement. It's not just a matter that the parents are involved, but are their kids seeing their faith practices? But trying to encourage families and saying, you know, I want to see your kids in church and I want to see them in there with you because they get a whole lot more out of their experience of worship if they see mom and dad there doing it, they know what it looks like, they know there's a value to it. Third point that Bankston talks about is parental consistency and warmth. Are the faith conversations consistent? The same way that you would say that discipline ought to be consistent within the home. Is this a consistent, regular, natural part? You know, are you driving to soccer practice and a spontaneous conversation comes up? That's some of the best, those are some of the best ones. I had a mom, longtime volunteer at my first call at Huntington Beach, and we're doing a service project at a soup kitchen, and she comes, she goes, "Dave, I did that thing you do." Okay, tell me more. What am I giving credit for here? I had spent enough time in my ministry talking about the impromptu, the random, the on-the-way-to conversations that she was able to have one of those where she was making a connection point where her daughter, who I think was maybe 15 or 16 at the time, made mention of something that happened in school that reminded her of something that took place in church on Sunday. Mom is able to start drawing additional connection points to it. I'm thinking, that's success. When mom starts to see how the various connection points make those connections so daily life functions together. The publication that Jim mentioned from Creative Communications is a workbook binder that tries to do that gives parents, using the pericopes, gives them a basic system whereby they're looking at, here's Sunday's lessons and how through the week can I be keeping track of the things that happen in life. And then Saturday's assignment is basically, how do I make connection point between the readings from the week and what's taking place in the week. And the idea is to start slowly arming yourself as a parent with what conversation starters can I have so that I can have these and feel comfortable having these kinds of impromptu conversations. Because we all know an impromptu conversation is something you've planned and looks spontaneous. I mean, this is how I create change. If I'm going to create change within a congregation, I spend somewhere between 4 and 6 months randomly having a conversation about what I plan to do as if it's a new idea every time I mention it. Well, I'm thinking we might want to do fill in the blank. So that by the time, and this is the stuff I'll tell my students the same thing, is that you plant seeds along the way so that by the time you make the change, the members of your congregation are looking at you going, "Didn't we start this already? We've been talking about it for months." Yeah, I know, just warming you up to it. Some of the ideas that Bankston suggests from his study is focus on the family as a unit, much more than most congregations do today. So thinking in terms of the family unit as a whole. Some of the time it's easy when we look at things in isolation to say, well, this is what the first graders are going to be doing, and here's what's going to, something for 5th grade, and this youth group is going to do this over here. And mom and dad are looking at this going, there is no way. I want to be involved, but this calendar is impossible. So systematically looking at it, and depending on the size of the ministry that you're dealing with, this can be more or less complicated, but for some of us, if our churches are of a smaller size, you can start looking at things much more personally and saying, okay, this will literally, as I schedule this, you can identify and say, this will affect this family, and this family. How many times in our programming do we stop and think, what is the ground level impact of a specifically identified family? A lot of times we unfortunately think in terms of programming. We're taught to think in terms of programming. And there's a place for programming, but as I've had conversations yesterday. What is the purpose of programming? Well, the purpose of programming is it's the structure in which you create the relational connections for ministry to happen. So the structure is not the primary. The second point that he makes, and this one I couldn't agree more, taking a long view in faith formation. Looking at things from birth through young adulthood and saying, what are the ways in which we are going to help mature young people and families together in a long-term process. Not that here's a program, here's a program, here's a program, and you make isolated decisions. And I know, I've been there, I've made those decisions, I've sat with junior high Sunday school teachers who don't like the particular curriculum we're using, and they insist, this is the one we have to have, this is what it looks like, but if it doesn't connect the dots with regard to faith formation in a way that leads from point A to point B, you've created a disjointed spot, and it's not going to be as effective. See, you're constantly having to look at the flow, to imagine, literally think about some of the youngest. Put a face to it, put a name to it. You know, you've got a 5-year-old little Timmy in your congregation. You go, what do I want for Timmy when he's 25? What do I want him to have experienced? When it's personalized, you can see that through line a whole lot better. Some of you, this will be old hat, but this idea, Christian Smith, in the National Study of Youth and Religion, one of the largest studies of how faith is transmitted and understood by youth. He coined the phrase moralistic therapeutic Deism. If you're not familiar with this is worth understanding. The basic concepts behind this: one, a God exists who created and ordered the world and watches over human life on earth. So the kind of a deistic, yes, there's a God, he is not particularly connected with who we are. God wants people to be good, nice, and fair to each other, as taught in the Bible and most world religions. So there's your moralism. Be good. Religion is about being good. And the therapeutic, the central goal of life is to be happy and to feel good about oneself. Smith found that this encapsulates what now is our young adults, and in fact actually slightly older young adults. This was, by and large, the transmitted faith from one generation to the next. And what he saw in this, and where he sees this coming from, is how faith was practiced. So if what we see is, yes, there is a God, but mom and dad don't actually pray to him, how does that shape their theology and understanding of who God is? If the typical teaching in a congregation becomes about doing what's right, my mother-in-law will occasionally talk about, is that the Jesus way? And I cringe. She means well. And if she sees the video, I'll have to explain that she means well. I probably will. The intent is good, but some of the time there's a tendency, especially with younger kids, to talk in terms of the context of our faith being about doing right as opposed to doing wrong. And if that's the primary driver, that has a long-lasting effect on how we understand the Christian faith. You know, the baptism in the church, I want my boys front and center. I want them to see what's happening. I had my 6-year-old, he will be sitting up on my lap. Oh, what's going on? What's the pastor saying? Oh, yeah, okay. Took the boys to Costco once after, well, we've taken them to Costco after services regularly. But there was one particular Sunday, and my oldest was wandering through the meat section and started blessing the meats as if he was going to be communion. He had the wording down fairly well. He's listening. He's catching it. You know, you think he's not paying attention. You know, there was a youth that was a part of our youth program years ago that very ADHD young man needed a second thing to be doing in order to focus himself. So the Etch-a-Sketches that we had in the church for small kids became a great toy for him. But he would actually interpret the sermon by Etch-a-Sketch. I have one that he framed in my office at Concordia Irvine that interprets a Pentecost sermon. The most amazing ways that young people will figure out how to pay attention. But you know, my boys will respond to things in sermons in the midst of the sermon out of nowhere. I'm thinking, you're paying no attention, you're doodling. And suddenly they're verbalizing an answer to the pastor's comments. I'm going, yep, you're tracking. And yet how many of our parents are not encouraged to deal with, yes, the squirreliness, the craziness? A 6-year-old sits still, well, pretty much never. My wife knew there was a difference between our boys before they were born. 6-year-old Wesley was moving constantly before birth. That has not stopped. So I don't expect him to sit still. Well, I like him to on occasion, but it's just not going to happen. So the thoughts behind this moralistic therapeutic deism: God does not need to be particularly involved in one's life except when God is needed to resolve a problem. He's put off at a distance. If that's what a young person sees in the home, if that's the way they see faith practiced, that's the way they will practice faith, because that's how they will understand it to be and taken shape. Good people go to heaven when they die. And sadly, many a good Lutheran think this is true. Because we unfortunately reinforce, because it's easy to reinforce this message rather than unpacking, no, seriously, there is nothing you've done to deserve this. That's a more complicated answer to provide a young person. It's more complicated to provide an adult. Our children are shaped primarily by how they see faith of their parents lived out. There's a Bible in the home. Do they ever see mom and dad read it? Do they learn? How do kids learn prayer? By seeing it modeled. Value the things they see modeled. So I love reading Star Wars novels. What does my 10-year-old take to my parents' house as I drop him off before heading here? He takes his own Star Wars novel, because he's gotten it into his head, I want to be like Dad. Now, he's 10, so he's going to get over that. But he will still be primarily shaped by what he sees my wife and I doing more than anybody else. So if he sees us place a value on the study of Scripture, he's going to value it. He asks to be a part of our adult Bible class. And I've had to have the conversation with our DCE to say, this is not something to take as an offense. It's the prof's kid. He just wants more, because he literally says, I don't learn quite as much as I'd like to in Sunday school. 10-year-old is this. Okay, kid, sure. And so we've given him the opportunity, and he is in our adult class. Now, there's been a couple of occasions where the topic has been such where I've said, all right, well, James, today you're going to be with your Sunday school class. we did a study on the book of Judges, and that can be real entertaining to teach to a group of adults, and really entertaining to teach to a 10-year-old. But not every topic is age appropriate. But at the same time, I do think that there's, for example, how many times do we teach the story of Jonah and skip Jonah chapter 4 with kids? The number of adults who will finally hear the full story of Jonah and go, wow, I never knew. Yeah, Jonah was pretty much, as a prophet of God, messed up from beginning to end. There is little evidence within the book of Jonah that he learned much. But if we cut off that last chapter, we give a false impression. So some of the time in our teaching is thinking through, there are certain realities that are not necessarily the most pleasant, but if they're age appropriate, they ought to be put in front of our kids. The heroes of faith in Hebrews chapter 11 are a messed up bunch of people. We talk about King David. He is a man after God's own heart. That's not the only thing the man was after. How do we have that? That makes for a really interesting junior high Bible study. Do we think in those terms to say, here's some of the reality behind who we are as sinners and how we can struggle together? This is another book, A Faith of Their Own. This is also kind of out of the National Study of Youth and Religion. Great quote that came out of here. Of all the family background characteristics we examined, the one that we expect to be most closely associated with adolescent religiosity is the religious lives of their parents. So again, the research keeps coming back and re-identifying how parents live out their faith has a consistent connection point with how a young person is going to live out their faith. Youth who have a parent with a higher level of private religious practice, especially a parent who makes children a focus of their prayers, may follow the religious example of their parent. You can tell the difference. If you can listen to children pray, my guess is you can tell the difference between the kid whose parents pray with them and the kid who doesn't have that. I try to pray nightly with my boys, and there are certain things that are just a rote part of it, and there are certain things that become a rote part of how they pray. Regularly, it's all about, let's make sure tomorrow was fun, and I want to have a fun day tomorrow. But there will also be moments where they will catch things, and I get migraines, and both of my boys will pray for my migraines, whether I mention it or not. But they've seen the pattern of these are the kinds of things that can be brought to God for His attention. So trying to get into a little bit of the practical aspect of this, one of the things I like to talk about is this idea of lifespan catechesis. I actually had a colleague before I published my book on the subject. He said, whatever you do, don't use the word catechesis. And I just quietly, yeah, okay. I think catechesis is the appropriate word. I honestly don't care if our churches give up confirmation programs, but they cannot give up catechizing. Because it's not about the program. It's about how we are teaching the faith. The structure is not the most relevant part. We want to equip and support the home beginning at baptism. Last congregation I served as BCE for families, our pastor offloaded his pre-baptismal meetings with families to me with the intent that I was going to be the person that was going to walk with them more long-term and more hands-on than he will, and that they needed to meet that person. So I would sit with families, talk through the theology of baptism. I would encourage them to bring the sponsors to that meeting, because I have a message for the sponsors to say, your job is not just to stand here. You have an ongoing responsibility, and I'm here to help you with that. The church is here to support you with that. But beginning the conversation to say, how does faith formation begin? And when it begins, as faith is given in baptism, we need to be, as a church and as a schools, we need to be walking with, intentionally, with the stopping points along the way, from that early moment on. I think we should be introducing the content of Luther's small catechism at a younger age. The idea, asking a 13-year-old, hey, start memorizing things. It is the squirreliest age to ask for memory work to be done. There is no reason why the bulk of the memorization content of Luther's small catechism can't be known, at least by those who are a part of a Lutheran school, for sure. And my kids are getting this at my Lutheran school, and I'm loving this. As they are coming home and they're learning the commandments, they're learning the Lord's Prayer, and they're learning the Apostles' Creed, because then they have a foundation that they take into a more formal confirmation class, and they're not learning what this is, they're unpacking the meaning and the application of it. That's what a 13 and 14-year-old wants to do. Developmentally, they're asking why, followed by why, followed by why. There's a really fun developmental parallel between preschoolers and early teenagers. The same foundational question, why, slightly different level and different answers, but it's the same question. Because for every answer you get, the same question can be asked again. And yes, it's obnoxious at times, but I would much rather have the question, because you have an engaged individual who is wanting to know more. Now again, come back to Dad. Dad is freaked out by this. You know, when you've taken that little bitty, and the little bitty is now almost as tall as Dad, and pimple-faced and all the fun stuff, and he's looking at you kind of going, yeah, but why, Dad? Our job is equipping, one, so Dad and Mom know where to find answers, but two, so that there's a comfort level in saying, Mom and Dad, you can answer the question by saying, I don't know. But let's find out together. That's a legitimate answer for Dad to give. That's a legitimate answer for Mom to give. But there has to be the freedom and the encouragement so that they can come to us, they can come to our pastors, they can come to someone at the church and say, you know what, I'm trying to figure this out. I got asked a question, and honestly, confirmation class, 13-year-olds' questions are the most amazing things on the planet. They come out of left field because they're taking this part over here, and they're taking this part over here, and they're going, what can I do with it? And they're squishing it together and seeing what can happen. And so they will hand you, as longtime educators, they will hand you questions, and you'll go, wow, I never thought of that. That's a compliment to them. Give them the compliment. So provide greater depth over time by integration across various ministry programs. So as you're extending this idea that catechesis is a longer process, have the conversation between church and school. Where do the various parts fit? What can be done within the school to start unpacking and start laying the foundation of the essentials of the faith? How does that connect with what's taking place in Sunday school? Do we have those conversations where the curriculum and what's taking place within the school is set side by side with what's happening on Sunday morning in Sunday school? Do we even have that conversation? If not, there's my challenge. What if you had that conversation? Because again, you're thinking little Timmy. And little Timmy is going from Sunday school to religion class in the school and thinking, I just had that lesson. We just read that story. Come on. last church I was serving, we had, at one point we were running 6 services on a Sunday over 4 service hours with 2 Sunday schools. 2 Sunday school hours. Running the exact same curriculum back to back. And I discovered that we had some students who their parents were teaching in the first Sunday school hour and then sending their kids to Sunday school a second time rather than take them into worship because it was such an outreach-oriented congregation that they were concerned with having room for more adults to come. So the unintended message was, don't send your kids to church. Oh, the poor fools who called me, as well as called a new pastor fresh out of seminary, and between the two of us we're going, yeah, no, that's going to change. But you had kids going through Sunday school. Can you imagine? It's the second time you're teaching the lesson to that kid and you're the teacher trying to teach them. I won't read it. And that's a real obvious one, but look at what we're doing across school and across church. And are we creating a situation in which the learning is not built one upon the other? Are we having those conversations? Is there prep that takes place in the school that then can be jumped off of in youth group? That can be jumped off of into Sunday school? Now granted, you're also going to notice, it's going to be obvious, you're not going to have, it's not identical populations, okay? So there's a piece of that dynamic that you're going to still say, okay, well, we can't totally do it, but I do want to encourage that conversation to take place. So the person that is, the student that is involved is thought of, as well as the students that are in one or the other alone. Mentor children and youth in the faith longer. And having long-term relational mentors that walk with them over a longer period of time. A lot of times we think in terms of our volunteers, our church side, and in the school there's a little bit of, well, here's your first grade teacher, here's your second grade teacher, here's your third grade teacher. But I know teachers. It's not as if you're done with that class and you never want to talk. I mean, okay, some of the students occasionally, yes. As my dad was preparing for retirement, he was literally calculating which class he wanted to go out on. Trying to figure, this one would be good, this one, no, I don't want to go out with that bunch. I was actually looking ahead to, she just retired this year after 45 years of service, 40 of them at that particular school. As a second grade teacher, that I was hoping she would retire because I knew what was coming in my son's now first grade class. And my joke on the side was, if she doesn't retire, that class will retire her. And I seriously did not want her. Don't go out that way. But being able to more long-term, how do you walk with someone through their faith formation so that the relationship carries on? One of the things that can be very helpful with this is what are the relational connection points that can be developed as you're transitioning from one area of ministry to the next. So putting this in a little bit more of my world with regard to the youth ministry, it's like having someone who their responsibility is high school youth ministry, and you're having them spend the 6 months leading into the end of the school year with junior high specifically making relational connections with 8th graders. Rather than getting to the point where, well, now you've graduated, I'm going to hand you off, but you have no idea who you're handing them off to. It's taking, I did this with some students where I took a young woman she was going to go to UCLA. And we had a campus ministry at UCLA. And I said, before you're going, I'm going to go take you up there and I'm going to introduce you to the leadership in that campus ministry. There's a difference between my sending an email and introducing and saying, no, we're going to drive to UCLA, we're going to spend a day, we're going to walk the campus together, we're going to get to know people. Because I'm relationally trying to hand the care that I've invested in you, and I'm handing that off to someone else, but I want to start building a relational connection prior to that. The other pieces I suggest is ask youth to confirm their faith later in their personal development. And later in their faith development. I honestly think 8th grade is the squirreliest time to ask kids, would you rather die than give up the faith? Sure. Can I go? My internship congregation in Austin still does confirmation in 9th and 10th grade. We started building in, and I kind of worked a little bit on this, even as an intern, on how we start doing some pre-catechetical work in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade years. Some of the content is taking place, but asking a 10th grader is a very different thing than asking an 8th grader. Developmentally, a 10th grader has an actual idea of what the question you're asking is. They've wrestled with it further. I honestly, and this gets a little uncomfortable, and I've had conversations with pastors who just look at me going, that's well and good, but how can you pull this off? I don't honestly think there should be a here's an age when we confirm. Because if we look at this as a discipling and catechizing process, what's critical is when they're ready to do this. Not that they're a particular age or that they fit the robes at the right time. Again, last congregation, I started planting that seed in the sense that there was a young lady who opted out of being confirmed her 8th grade year because she really hadn't been able, based on her own personal faith, based on where she's at in life, was not able to participate in confirmation. Rather than making it punitive, we started trying to say, how can we take the stigma off of this so that rather than you feeling as if you're missing out because you're not a part of your class, that it's about when you're ready to make a profession of faith before the members of the congregation, rather than it being, well, you do this because this is your age. It's messy. We like systems, we like structure, and I'm suggesting things that are intentionally messy. But the reason behind that is because we're dealing with the individual, not the program. It's about discipling and catechizing individual students. It's why both congregations I would have impromptu high school confirmation classes. And I've actually, as a volunteer, brought that in to my current congregation, where we had a couple of older high school students who asked the question, well, what is this confirmation thing? Because I've heard some of the other kids in youth group talking about it. And of course, my dear old DCE goes, talk to Dr. Dave over there. He's kind of written some stuff on it. I'm like, really? That's going to be the setup in youth group? You're going to reference the author? Yeah, great. But we did. We ended up, he and I tag teamed. We had 3 young ladies, and they actually were confirmed. We had to schedule it, unfortunately, during the last National Youth Gathering, so our DCE, Tim and I, had to miss it, but we recorded videos for them, congratulating them on it. One of the young ladies was baptized that day as well. But that should be a normal part of our churches. You know, when I was doing my doctoral research, I included a question about, you know, how many high school students are confirmed, and the number of really puzzled, well, why would we do that type responses were amazing to me. What you would do, you know, does no one new come to your congregation after 8th grade? I mean, if that's the case, there's other issues we can talk about. Again, it should not be an arbitrary, here's the date. All right, so the way forward. So thoughts on this. A unified approach to discipleship and catechesis at the home, the church, and at school. That means some interesting conversations. That means church staff, school staff, we're having regular conversations about what it means to disciple the young people and the families within our congregations. Maybe I'm giving you a theme idea for your all-workers conference. Don't know. And congratulations. I love the fact that you guys do that. Not all districts do that, and I think that's something very much to hang on to. That is an excellent thing. But taking the time to really think through, how is it, do we have a unified approach? Because if the pastor has one particular philosophy, and the teachers, you guys are heading in a different direction, it's like having a team of horses and they're trying to run in different directions. It's not terribly effective. Because again, it's not about the programs, it's about the individuals who are in them. It's about your students who you have some time with, but trying to give their families, their parents, a unified, obvious concept of here's what it means to disciple, so that they're able to replicate it without being confused. Individualized approach with coordination across ministries. This is some of the messy stuff. So you're thinking, do we not have, I'm not suggesting, you don't say we're not having, it's not that you don't have programs. It's not that you don't have the structure. It's what does the structure serve? The structure serves the individuals who are in your church, who are in your school, so that you can serve individual homes. It means taking some of the time to identify and sit down and think, what's happening within this particular family? I think back to my own ministry, and I have regrets about not spending time contemplating, specifically thinking about what's the impact of what we're doing in particular individual families. It's something that I wish I could bring back into my younger self and say, I ought to have spent more time thinking through what can I do to particularly disciple the Johnson family or the Simonson family. What can I do to walk beside them in particular? I think we should have transition plans across age-specific ministries. How are our families progressing through the whole of what we do in a way that logically and rationally makes sense? How is communication coordinated? I somewhat intentionally encourage some additional communication even within my own church and school, but I did it wearing my district hat, which can cause some plausible deniability about my meddling, but we're trying to do a video to help promote our 4th, 5th, and 6th grade district event. So I emailed a few of our area principals and said, hey, would you be willing, we wanted to shoot this video, can we get permission to have some of your students reading the theme verse? You know, with a theme like whatever. You can imagine the fun of what that video is going to look like. So one of the principals is, my son's principal, which would theoretically mean he may end up in the video. I'm not going to manipulate for that, but it may happen. In the midst of this, what ends up happening is it creates a communication that might not otherwise have happened between our principal and our DCE about our principal getting a little more excited about making sure, hey, we should communicate to our parents and encourage them to send their kids to this event. Something the DCE has been struggling to get going. Now, through the sidebar communication, suddenly the principal is on board and excited about it. There's going to be much more success, I think, because if you're hearing it here, this is a part of what we do, and if you're hearing it from your pastor, you're hearing it from your principal, you're hearing it from your teacher, you're hearing it from your DCE, that voice together becomes unified and it takes a different shape. So I'm going to come back to it again. Parents are the single greatest influence on the future faith lives of children and youth. This is the result of my doctoral dissertation being rewritten in a form. Nobody reads doctoral dissertations unless you're doing a doctoral dissertation because they are inherently unreadable. This is my attempt at making it readable. But out of that study, the biggest thing that I found, the single greatest predictor of a youth's connection to the life of the church following confirmation was their parents' connection to the life of the church prior to confirmation. So how we get families connected and going together is critically important. Thank you. Hopefully this was helpful.